This is what a world without American leadership looks like. Right now, Turkish forces escalating their military attack in northern Syria. The situation getting more dangerous and more dire as our allies in the fight against ISIS, the Kurds, feeling like they had nowhere to go after we abandoned them, have struck a deal with the Syrian government, whose leader is, of course, Russian-backed Bashar al-Assad, an enemy of the U.S. We have to warn you that the video we're about to play is disturbing. NBC News has blurred the most graphic portions and is not independently confirmed, but it purports to show members of a pro-Turkish militia executing prisoners on a road in northern Syria. And as the Kurds do everything they can to fight against the Turkish incursion, there's also worry of a resurgence of the Islamic State. The Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces and Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said Sunday that close to 800 members of a camp holding the families of ISIS fighters had escaped after Turkish shelling. Amid all this turmoil, the Secretary of Defense announced yesterday that the president directed a, quote, deliberate withdrawal of roughly 1,000 American troops, ending nearly all of America's presence in the area. But there's a problem. Taking troops out isn't an easy undertaking. David Sanger in the New York Times writes this, quote, at the Pentagon, officials struggled with the right response if Turkish forces, NATO allies, again opened fire on any of the 1,000 or so Americans now preparing to retreat from their positions inside Syria. Those troops are trapped for now, since Turkey has cut off the roads. Removing them may require an airlift. And just this hour, the president announced he'll impose sanctions on Turkey for their actions in Syria, which he put in motion soon. Let's bring in retired four-star general and NBC military analyst Barry McCaffrey. Of all the horrors of the weekend, the most horrific was that line about the Pentagon having no plan to get 1,000 U.S. troops out of Syria. What do you know? What do you make of that report?
Well, I think basically there is no national security foreign policy process anymore. Where you bring together the tools of the U.S. government, the Defense Department, Treasury, State, CIA. That was a one-on-one phone call on a Sunday between Mr. Trump and Erdogan, an authoritarian strongman who has taken Turkey as a NATO ally and steadily walked them into being an active threat to us. And then Mr. Esper, the Secretary of Defense, finds out about it. Now he's got a very tricky problem of getting our special operations forces out of there alive. I'm sure they'll pull it off. But again, this is, if you're going to throw allies to the wolves and disregard they fought and died to support your mission, you at least ought to get something for it. What was Mr. Trump thinking of? For God's sakes, he handed a victory to Assad, the Russian armed forces, and Iran. It's an unbelievable situation.
General McCaffrey, I think we risk sort of covering the volume of calamities that Trump puts in motion. But if we could just freeze frame on something you just said, the people in danger right now at 4:39 Eastern are 1,000 American troops that the Pentagon may have to airlift out of Syria without the help of the people who've kept them safe in Syria as long as they've been there, our Kurdish allies, who are now aligned with our enemy, Assad. How dangerous is that for us?
It couldn't be any more risky. I mean, these poor people feel abandoned. They should be. They've been thrown to the wolves. The Turkish army's bearing down them. The Arab militias will be the worst. Their purpose is to terrorize the Kurdish population, a couple million people, and force them into flight. So the U.S. now has to assume that we're on our own until we get them out of there. I'm reasonably sure they'll come out safely. But again, they were caught by surprise. There was no thought about what are we doing to these people out there carrying a gun at the end of the line. Turkey is also acting in a very aggressive manner toward U.S. forces on the ground. One of the things I have been publicly calling upon now is to think about isolating Turkey as a NATO ally. They're a huge threat to us. And by the way, there may be as many as 60 U.S. nuclear weapons in there under the NATO sharing concept. So we're in a very difficult situation. Mr. Trump almost single-handedly got us there.
Ambassador McFaul, there are two phone calls now under scrutiny. And General McCaffrey and Brett McGurk, former U.S. envoy to the coalition, to fight ISIS have both called for understanding more about what went on in this phone call. But there's one guy who knows. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He was on the call with Erdogan, State Department officials said. The official didn't characterize his views, but Pompeo had opposed the president's previous move to withdraw U.S. forces. So Pompeo sits on the phone with Zelensky, listens to Donald Trump ask for dirt on the Bidens. Mike Pompeo, America's Secretary of State, sits on the phone, listens to Donald Trump greenlight a military operation that imperils the lives of our troops in Syria and sends our Kurdish allies running into the arms of Assad. What's Pompeo doing?
Great point.
Was that
I'm glad you pointed that out.
Oh, that was for Ambassador McFaul. We'll come back to you, General.
But, General, I'm just going to agree with you. I think the thing that General McCaffrey said earlier is really important, and then it gets to Pompeo, is that the normal standard operating procedure for making national security decisions is completely broke down. You know, in the old days, in the Obama days and the Bush days, the president would sit down there in the White House Situation Room. His entire cabinet would be there, and they would deliberate about what they want to do vis-a-vis Ukraine or vis-a-vis Syria. And then the talking points would get written up, and then the president would get on the phone with the president of Turkey or the president of Ukraine. We know now that that system does not work at all. And then, on top of it, you have this very curious thing where the Secretary of State is in on these calls. I don't ever recall Secretary Clinton being on any call that I was on with President Obama. And I do think we need to hear from our Secretary of State. What is his thinking here? Can he give us the justification for what is happening in terms of American national interests? Because he seems to be the one closest to the president in these deliberations right now.
General McCaffrey, I'll give you the last word.
Well, I think the other thing is, look, these are military operations. Our forces are at risk. They're deployed globally. They're certainly heavily deployed in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan. Where is the deliberate advice of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? Where is the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, a very experienced guy? Why is the President of the United States making sole decisions in one-on-one phone calls with dictators? This is a very tricky situation for the United States.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.